Well, that was fun. I have no idea how that happened. I was live and then I wasn't. I probably accidentally clicked a button or something. I don't know. My apologies. Um. Okay, so I gave the update yesterday, but I don't know if my book club people have seen it or not, so I will just go ahead and say that here. Um, I was not planning on mixing next week at all. Had I been, I would have given you more notice. I had it all planned out so that when I traveled to Dallas for my next appointment, it would be on a Sunday and I wouldn't miss Saturday. However, I got a last minute call the other day asking if I could be in Colorado this weekend to help out some family. So it looks like I'm taking Friday off and I'm going to Colorado and I'm coming back on Saturday and then I'm leaving for Dallas on Sunday. If the mission runs smoothly and I get back in time, I will try my hardest to do one Saturday night, but I don't know, guys. One time I woke up at 7:30 in the morning thinking I would get everything done and drive home, and I still didn't make it home till 6 o'clock the next morning. So no promises, but it shouldn't be more than 1 week that I miss. So my apologies in advance. I'm so sorry. I'm trying to get it together, how everything goes. As always, please forgive the dog's interruptions and traffic and anybody who may knock on my door, the mailman, any of that good stuff. If somebody else is live, absolutely go watch them. This will be here later. What else? I think that's it. I think that's about it. I did, however, say that before we started today's reading, we were going to go over the clues of where we were, right? Our biggest clue is always going to be the line that keeps being repeated in this book. Jake says it. Roland has said it. The first time we hear it is when Jake is falling. If you guys remember back to book 1, The Gunslinger, when they are in the mines and he lets Jake fall. Right before Jake falls, he says, "It's okay, there are other worlds than these." And we know that Eddie and Susanna and Jake come from the same world, different time periods in the same world, and we know that that's not Roland's world. So we know another clue was the Thinny. We went through a Thinny. Now, we've talked about the Thinny in his story that we just read. It plays a part in the battle in Mejis. But that doesn't tell you what's on the other side of that Thinny, right? And we may never know. I don't know. We'll keep that in mind. But here's the clues of where we just came from before we entered Roland's story of Mejis and his childhood. So here's the clues. The world that we just came through was ravaged by a superflu, and we saw the word Captain Trips. It's also a deserted Topeka, Kansas, and there's a note addressed to Abigail that they find on the car windshield. Now, that Abigail is probably your biggest clue of what world we just left. There's also a reference to the Walking Dude and the Crimson King. Again, other worlds than these, and the Wheel of Ka. Also, the title of this next chapter that we're going to read, this is the next section of the book, not the title of the chapter, is called All God's Chillin' Got Shoes. And that is another clue. So for those of you who are avid Stephen King readers, I'm sure you've put it together by now. But for those of you who are not, we just left the world of the Stand. So without giving away too much, I'm going to talk about a couple of the characters, why they're clues and what they mean. So we started out book 1 with the gunslinger following the man in black, right? The man in black fled across the desert and the gunslinger followed. The man in black, Walter O'Dim, Randall Flagg, all the same person. They're all the same person. Now, they're not the big bad guy. They're not the Crimson King, but they're more like the right hand of the Crimson King, right? Kind of like almost like a representation of the Crimson King outside of the tower. And in that same vein, Abigail is the opposite of Randall Flagg. Abigail is somewhat like the gunslinger in her own world. She's a representation of the good of the Dark Tower, but again, she's not a gunslinger. She's not the person, she's not Roland, obviously. And so that's very symbolic. Finding a letter to her is very symbolic, and it kind of lets you know who's where, right? These guys are obviously on the side of Abigail. They find a note addressed to Abigail, all of those things. So the world of the Stand is where we just went through when Roland and Eddie and Susanna went through that thinny. Anyway, so now you know that's where we were before Roland went into his story of his past. I would have told you before, but I was giving people time to piece it together, so I waited till after his childhood story to tell you. But yes, we just left the world of the Stand. All right, so now we are on part 4. All God's Chillin' Got Shoes. Chapter 1, Kansas in the Morning. For the first time in hours? Days? The gunslinger fell silent. He sat for a moment looking toward the building to the east of them with the sun behind it. The glass palace was a black shape surrounded by a gold nimbus, with his forearms propped on his knees. Then he took the water skin which lay on the pavement beside him, held it over his face, opened his mouth, and upended it. He drank what happened to go in his mouth. The others could see the Adam's apple working as he lay back in the breakdown lane, still pouring, but drinking didn't seem to be his primary purpose. Water streamed down his deeply lined forehead and bounced off his closed eyelids. It pooled in the triangular hollow at the base of his throat and ran back from his temples, wetting his hair and turning it darker. At last he put the water skin aside and only lay there, eyes closed, arms stretched out high above his head, like a man surrendering in his sleep. Steam rose in delicate tendrils from his wet face. "Ah," he said. "Feel better?" Eddie asked. The gunslinger's lids rose, disclosing those faded yet somehow alarming blue eyes. "Yes, I do. I don't understand how that can be as much as I dreaded telling this, but I do." "An ologist of the psyche could probably explain it to you," Susanna said, "but I doubt you'd listen." She put her hands in the small of her back, stretched and winced. But the wince was only reflex. The pain and stiffness she'd expected weren't there, and although there was one small creak near the base of her spine, she didn't get the satisfying series of snaps, crackles, and pops she had expected. "Tell you one thing," Eddie said, "this gives a whole new meaning to get it off your chest. How long have we been here, Roland?" "Just one night." "The spirits have done it all in a single night," Jake said in a dreamy voice. His legs were crossed at the ankles. Oy sat in the diamond shape made by the boy's bent knees, looking at him with his bright gold-black eyes. Roland sat up, wiping at his wet cheeks with his neckerchief and looking at Jake sharply. "What is it you say?" "Not me. A guy named Charles Dickens wrote that, in a story called A Christmas Carol. All in a single night, huh?" "Does any part of your body say it was longer?" Jake shook his head. "No. He felt pretty much the way he did any morning. Better than on some. He had to take a leak, but his back teeth weren't exactly floating or anything like that. Eddie? Susanna? I feel good, Susanna said, surely not as if I'd stayed up all night, let alone many of 'em. Eddie said, it reminds me of the time I spent as a junkie in a way. Doesn't everything? Roland asked dryly. Oh, that's funny, Eddie said. A real Hal. Next train that goes crazy on us, you can ask it the silly questions. What I meant was that you'd spend so many nights high that you got used to the feeling, like 10 pounds of shit in a 9-pound bag when you got up in the morning. Bad head, stuffy nose, thumping heart, glass in the old spine. Take it from your old pal Eddie. You can tell just from the way you feel in the morning how good dope is for you. Anyway, you'd get so used to that, I did anyway, that when you actually took a night off, you'd wake up the next morning and sit there on the edge of the bed thinking, what the fuck's wrong with me? Am I sick? I feel weird. Did I have a stroke in the night? Jake laughed, then clapped a hand over his mouth so violently that it was as if he wanted not just to hold the sound in, but call it back. Sorry, he said. That made me think of my dad. One of my people, huh? Eddie said. Anyway, I expect to be sore. I expect to be tired. I expect to creak when I walk. But I actually think all I need to put me right is a quick pee in the bushes. And a bite to eat? Roland asked. Eddie had been wearing a small smile. Now it faded. No, he said. After that story, I'm not at all that hungry. In fact, I'm not all that hungry. In fact, I'm not hungry at all. Eddie carried Susanna down the embankment and popped her behind a stand of laurel bushes to do her necessary. Jake was 60 or 70 yards east in the grove of birches. Roland had said he would use the remedial strip to do this morning's necessary, then raised his eyebrows when his New York friends laughed. Susanna wasn't laughing when she came out of the bushes. Her face was streaked with tears. Eddie didn't ask her, he knew. He had been fighting the feeling himself. He took her gently in his arms, and she put her face against the side of his neck, and they stayed that way for a little while. Charyu tree, she said at last, pronouncing it as Roland had. Charyu tree. With a little upturned vowel at the end. Yeah, Eddie said, thinking that a Charlie by any other name was still a Charlie. As he supposed a rose was a rose was a rose. Come reap. She raised her head and began to wipe her swimming eyes. To have gone through all that, she said, keeping her voice low and looking once at the turnpike embankment to make sure Roland wasn't there looking down at them. And at 14. Yeah, it makes my adventures searching for the elusive dime bag in Tompkins Square look pretty tame. In a way, though, I'm almost relieved. Relieved? Why? Because I thought he was going to tell us that he killed her himself for his damned tower. Susan looked squarely into his eyes. But he thinks that's what he did. Don't you understand? When they were back together again, and there was food actually in sight, all of them decided they could eat a bit after all. Roland shared out the last of the burritos. Maybe later today we can stop in at the nearest Boing Boing Burgers and see what they've got for leftovers, Eddie thought. And they dug in. All of them, that was, except Roland. He picked up his burrito, looked at it, then looked away. Eddie saw an expression of sadness on the gunslinger's face that made him look both old and lost. It hurt Eddie's heart, but he couldn't think what to do about it. Jake, almost 10 years younger, could. He got up, went to Roland, knelt beside him, put his arms around the gunslinger's neck, and hugged him. I'm sorry you lost your friend, he said. Roland's face worked, and for a moment Eddie was sure he was going to lose it. A long time between hugs, maybe. Mighty long. Eddie had to look away for a moment. Kansas in the morning, he told himself, a sight you'd never expected to see. Dig on that for a while and let the man be. When he looked back, Roland had it together again. Jake was sitting beside him, and Oy had his long snout on one of the gunslinger's boots. Roland had begun to eat his burrito. Slowly and without much relish, but he was eating. A cold hand, Susanna's, crept into Eddie's. He took it and folded his fingers over it. One night, she marveled. On our body clocks, at least, Eddie said. In our heads. Who knows? Roland agreed, but storytelling always changes time. At least, it does in my world. He smiled. It was unexpected, as always, and as always it transformed his face into something nearly beautiful. Looking at that, Eddie mused, you could see how a girl might have fallen in love with Roland, once upon a time, back when he had been long and going on tall, but maybe not so ugly, back when the tower hadn't yet got its best hold on him. I think it's the way in our worlds, Sugar. I think it's that way in all worlds, Sugar, Susanna said. Can I ask you a couple of questions before we get rolling? If you like. What happened to you? How long were you gone? I was certainly gone, you're right about that. I was traveling, wandering. Not in Merlin's Rainbow exactly. I don't think I ever would have returned from there if I'd gone into it while I was still sick. But everyone has a wizard's glass, of course. Here. He tapped his forehead gravely, just above the space between his eyebrows. That's where I went. That's where I traveled while my friends traveled east with me. I got better there, little by little. I held on to the ball, and I traveled inside my head, and I got better. But the glass never glowed for me until the very end, when the battlements of the castles and the towers of the city were actually in sight. If it had awakened earlier, he shrugged. If it had awakened before I'd started to get some of my strength of mind back, I don't think I'd be here now, because any world, even a pink one with a glass sky, would have been preferable to one where there was no Susan. I suppose the force that gives the glass its life knew that, and waited. But when it did glow for you again, it told you the rest, Drake said. It must have. It told you the parts that weren't there to see. Yes, I know as much of the story as I do because of what I saw in the ball. You told us once that John Farson wanted your head on a pole, Eddie said, because you stole something from him, something he held dear. It was the glass ball, wasn't it? Yes. He was more than furious when he found out. He was insane with rage. In your parlance, Eddie, he went nuclear. How many more times did it glow for you? Susanna asked. And what happened to it? Jake added. I saw in it 3 times after we left Maquis Barony, Roland said. The first was on the night before we came home to Gilead. That was when I traveled in it the longest, and it showed me what I've told you. A few things I've only guessed at, but most I was shown. It showed me these things not to teach or enlighten, but to hurt and wound. The remaining pieces of the wizard's rainbow are all evil things. Hurt enlivens them, somehow. I waited until my mind was strong enough to understand and withstand. And then, it showed me all the things I missed in my stupid adolescent complacency, my lovesick days, my prideful, murderous conceit. Roland, don't. Susanna said, don't let it hurt you still. But it does. It always will. Never mind. It doesn't matter now. The tale is old. The second time I saw into the glass, went into the glass, was 3 days after I came home. My mother wasn't there, although she was due that evening. She had gone into Debaria, a kind of retreat for women, to wait and pray for my return. Nor was Martin there. He was in Crescia with Farson. The ball, Eddie said. Your father had it by then. No, Roland said. He looked down at his hands, and Eddie observed a faint flush rising into his cheeks. I didn't give it to him at first. I found it. Hard to give up. I bet, Susanna said. You and everyone else who ever looked into the goddamn thing. On the 3rd afternoon, before we were to be banqueted to celebrate our safe return. I bet you were really in a mood to party, too, Eddie said. Roland smiled without humor, still studying his hands. At around 4 of the clock, Cuthbert and Elaine came to my rooms. We were a trio for an artist to paint, I wot. Wind-burned, hollow-eyed, hand-covered with healing cuts and scrapes from our climb up the side of the canyon, scrawny as scarecrows. Even Elaine, who tended toward stoutness, all but disappeared when he turned sideways. They confronted me, I suppose you'd say. They kept the secret of the ball to that point, out of respect for me and for the loss I'd suffered, they told me, and I believed them. But they would keep it no longer than that night's meal. If I would give it up voluntarily, it would be a question for our fathers to decide. They were horribly embarrassed, especially Cuthbert, but they were determined. I told them I'd give it over to my own father before the banquet, before my mother arrived by coach from Debaria even. They should come early and see that I kept my promise. Cuthbert started to hem and haw and say that wouldn't be necessary, but of course it was necessary. Yeah, Eddie said. He had the look of a man who understood this part of the story perfectly. You can go into the crapper on your own, but it's a lot easier to actually flush all the bad shit down the toilet if you have somebody with you. Elaine, at least, knew it would be better for me, easier, if I didn't have to hand the ball over alone. He hushed Cuthbert up and said they'd be there, and they were, and I gave it over, little as I wanted to. My father went as pale as paper when he looked into the bag and saw what was there, then excused himself and took it away. When he came back, he picked up his glass of wine and went on talking to us of our adventures in Mayhees as if nothing had happened. But between the time your friends talked to you about it and the time you gave it up, you looked into it, Jake said, went into it, traveled in it. What did it show you that time? First the tower again, Roland said, and the beginning of the way there. I saw the fall of Gilead and the triumph of the good man. We put those things back a mere 20 months or so by destroying the tankers in the oil patch. I could do nothing about that, but it showed me something I could do. There was a certain knife. The blade had been treated with an especially potent poison, something from a distant mid-world kingdom called Garland. Stuff so strong even the tiniest cut would cause almost instant death. A wandering singer, in truth, John Farson's eldest nephew, had brought this knife to his court. The man he gave it to was the castle's chief of domestic staff. This man was to pass the knife on to the actual assassin. My father was not meant to see the sun come up on the morning after the banquet. He smiled at them grimly. Because of what I saw in the wizard's glass. The knife never reached the hand that would have used it, and there was a new chief of domestics by the end of that week. These are pretty tales, I tell you, are they not? Aye, very pretty indeed. Did you see the person the knife was meant for? Susanna asked. The actual killer. Yes. Anything else? Did you see anything else? Jake asked. The plan to murder Roland's father didn't seem to hold much interest for him. Yes. Roland looked puzzled. Shoes. Just for a minute, shoes tumbling through the air. At first I thought they were autumn leaves, and when I saw what they really were, they were gone, and I was lying on my bed with the ball hugged in my arms, pretty much the way I carried it back from Mayhees. My father, as I've said, his surprise when he looked inside the bag was very great indeed. You told him who had the knife with the special poison on it, Susanna thought. Jeeves the butler, or whoever, but you didn't tell him who was supposed to actually use it, did you, sugar? Why not? Because you wanted to take care of that little spot of work your own self. But before she could ask, Eddie was asking a question of his own. Shoes, flying through the air, does that mean anything to you now? Roland shook his head. Tell us about the rest of what you saw in it, Susanna said. He gave her a look of such terrible pain that what Susanna had only suspected immediately solidified to fact in her mind. She looked away from him and groped for Eddie's hand. I cry your pardon, Susanna, but I cannot. Not now. For now I've told all I can. All right, Eddie said. All right, Roland, that's cool. Ooh, Oy agreed. Did you ever see the witch again? Jake asked. For a long time it seemed Roland would not answer this either, but in the end he did. Yes. She wasn't done with me. Like my dreams of Susan, she followed me, all the way from Mayhees. She followed me. What do you mean? Jake asked in a low, odd voice. Cripes, Roland, what do you mean? Not now. He got up. It's time we were on our way again. He nodded to the building, which floated ahead of them. The sun was just now clearing its battlements. Yon glitter dome's a good distance away, but I think we can reach it this afternoon if we move brisk. 'Twould be best. It's not a place I'd reach after nightfall, if that can be avoided. Do you know what it is yet? Susanna asked. Trouble, he repeated. And in our road. For a while that morning, the Thinny warbled so loudly that not even the bullets in their ears would entirely stop up the sound. At its worst, Susanna felt as if the bridge of her nose would simply disintegrate, and when she looked at Jake, she saw he was weeping copiously. Not crying the way people do when they're sad, but the way they do when their sinuses are in total revolt. She couldn't get the saw player the kid had mentioned out of her mind. Sounds Hawaiian, she thought over and over again as Eddie pushed her grimly along in the new wheelchair, weaving in and out of the stalled vehicles. Sounds Hawaiian, doesn't it? Sounds fucking Hawaiian, doesn't it? Miss Oh-So Black and Pretty. On both sides of the turnpike, the Thinny lapped all the way up to the embankment, casting its twitching, misshapen reflection of trees and grain elevators, seeming to watch the pilgrims pass as hungry animals in a zoo might watch plump children. Susanna would find herself thinking of the Thinny in Eyebolt Canyon, reaching out hungrily through the smoke for Latigo's milling men, pulling them in, and someone going in on their own, walking like zombies in a horror movie. And then she would find herself thinking of the guy in Central Park again, the wacko with the saw. Sounds Hawaiian, doesn't it? Counting one Thinny, and it sounds Hawaiian, doesn't it? Just when she thought she could stand it not a moment longer, the Thinny began to draw back from I-70 again, and its humming warble at least began to fade. Susanna was eventually able to pull the bullets out of her ears. She tucked them into the side pocket of her chair with a hand that shook slightly. "That was a bad one," Eddie said. His voice sounded clogged and weepy. She looked around at him and saw his cheeks were wet, his eyes red. "Take it easy, Susie Pie," he said. "It's my sinuses, that's all. That sound kills 'em." "Me too," Susanna said. "My sinuses are okay, but my head aches," Jake said. "Roland, do you have any more aspirin?" Roland stopped, rummaged, and found the bottle. "Did you ever see Clay Reynolds again?" Jake asked after swallowing the pills with water from the skin he carried. "No, but I know what happened to him. He got a bunch together, some of them deserters from Farson's army, went to robbing banks, in toward our part of the world, this was, but by then bank thieves and stage robbers didn't have much to fear from gunslingers." "The gunslingers were busy with Farson," Eddie said. "Yes, but Reynolds and his men were trapped by a smart sheriff who turned the main street of a town called Oakley into a killing zone. 6 of the 10 in the gang were killed outright. The rest were hung. Reynolds was one of those. This was less than a year later, during the time of Wide Earth." He paused, then said, "One of those shot dead in the killing zone was Coral Thorin. She had become Reynolds' woman, rode and killed with the rest of 'em." They went on in the silence for a bit. In the distance, the Thinny warbled its endless song. Jake suddenly ran ahead to a parked camper. A note had been left under the wiper blade on the driver's side. By standing on his toes, he was just able to reach it, and he scanned it, frowning. "What does it say?" Eddie said. Jake handed it over. Eddie looked, then passed it to Susanna, who read it to turn and gave it to Roland. He looked, then shook his head. I can make out only a few words. Old woman, dark man. What does the rest say? Read it to me." Jake took it back. "The old woman from the dreams is in Nebraska. Her name is Abigail." He paused. Then down here it says, "The dark man is in the west. Maybe Vegas." Jake looked up at the gunslinger, the note fluttering in his hand, his face puzzled and uneasy. But Roland was looking toward the palace which shimmered across the highway. The palace that was not in the west, but in the east. The palace that was light, not dark. "In the west," Roland said. "Dark man, dark tower, and always in the west." "Nebraska west of here, too," Susanna said hesitantly. "I don't know if that matters, this Abigail person, but I think she's part of another story," Roland said. "But a story close to this one," Eddie put in. "Next door, maybe? Close enough to swap sugar for salt or start arguments." "I'm sure you're right," Roland said, "and we may have business with the old woman and the dark man yet, but today our business is east. Come on." They began walking again. "What about Sheemy?" Jake asked after a while. Roland laughed, partly in surprise at the question, partly in pleased remembrance. "He followed us. It couldn't have been easy for him, and it must have been damn scary in places. There were wheels and wheels of wild country between Mahis and Gilead, and plenty of wild folks, too. Worse than just folks, mayhap. But Ka was with him, and he showed up in time for year's end fair. He and that damned mule. Cappy? Jake asked. Appy, Oy repeated, patting along at Jake's heels. When we went in search of the tower, I and my friends, Shimi was with us. As a sort of squire, I suppose you'd say. But Roland trailed off, biting at his lip, and of that he would say no more. Cordelia? Susan asked. The crazy aunt. Dead before the bonfire had burned down to embers. It might have been a heart storm or a brainstorm, what Eddie calls a stroke. Perhaps it was shame, Susanna thought, or horror at what she'd done. It may have been, Roland said. Waking to the truth when it's too late is a terrible thing. I know that very well. Something up there, Jake said, pointing at a long stretch of road from which the cars had been cleared. Do you see? Roland did. With his eyes, he seemed to see everything, but it was another 15 minutes or so before Susanna began to pick up the small black specks ahead in the road. She wasn't quite sure she knew what they were, although what she thought was less vision than intuition. 10 minutes after that, she was sure. They were shoes. 6 pairs of shoes placed neatly in a line across the eastbound lanes of Interstate 70. And that is the end of that chapter, but I think... How long is the next one? You know what? Since I might miss next week, we're going to continue reading. How's that? Shoes in the road. They reached the shoes at mid-morning. Beyond them, clearer now, stood the glass palace. It glimmered a delicate green shade like the reflection of a lily pad in still water. There were shining gates in front of it. Red pennons snapped from its towers in a light breeze. The shoes were also red. Susanna's impression that there were 6 pairs was understandable, but wrong. There were actually 4 pairs and 1 quartet. This latter, 4 dark red booties made of supple leather, was undoubtedly meant for the 4-footed member of their quartet. Roland picked one of them up and felt inside it. He didn't know how many bumblers had worn shoes in the history of the world, but he was willing to guess that none had ever been gifted with a set of silk-lined leather booties. Bali, Gucci, eat your heart out, Eddie said. This is great stuff. Susanna's were easiest to pick out, not just because of the feminine sparkly swoops on the sides. They weren't really shoes at all. They had been made to fit over the stumps of her legs, which ended just above the knees. Now look at this, she marveled, holding up one so the sun could flash on the rhinestones, with which the shoes were decorated, if they were rhinestones. She had a crazy notion that maybe they were diamond chips. Cappies! After 4 years of getting along in what my friend Cynthia calls circumstances of reduced leg room, I finally got myself a pair of cappies. Think of that. Cappies, Eddie mused. Is that what they call them? That's what they call them, sugar. Jake's were bright red Oxfords. Except for the color, they would have looked perfectly at home in the well-bred classrooms of the Piper School. He flexed one, then turned it over. The sole was bright and unmarked. There was no manufacturer's stamp, nor had he really expected one. His father had maybe a dozen pair of fine, handmade shoes. Jake knew them when he saw them. Eddie's were low boots with Cuban heels. Maybe in this world you call them Mahis heels, he thought, and pointed toes. What, back in his other life, had been known as street boppers. Kids from the mid-60s, an era Odetta/Detta/Susanna had just missed, might have called them beetle boots. Roland's, of course, were cowboy boots. Fancy ones. You'd go dancing rather than droving in such as these, looped stitching, side decorations, narrow, haughty arches. He examined them without picking them up and looked at his fellow travelers and frowned. They were looking at each other. You would have said 3 people couldn't do that. Only a pair. But you only would have said it if you'd never been part of a quartet. Roland still shared Kef with them. He felt the powerful current of their mingled thought but could not understand it, because it's of their world. They came from different wends of that world, but they see something here that's common to all 3 of them. "What is it?" he asked. "What do they mean, these shoes?" "I don't think any of us know that exactly," Susanna said. "No," Jake said. "It's another riddle." He looked at the weird, blood-red Oxford shoe in his hand with distaste. "Another goddamn riddle." "Tell me what you know." He looked toward the glass palace again. It was perhaps 15 New York miles away now, shining in the clear day, delicate as a mirage, but as real as, well, as real as shoes. "Please tell me what you know about these shoes." "I got shoes, you got shoes, all God's chillin' got shoes," Odetta said. That was the prevailing opinion, anyway. "Well," Eddie said, "we got 'em anyway. And you're thinking what I'm thinking, aren't you?" "I guess I am. You, Jake?" Instead of answering with words, Jake picked up the other Oxford. Roland had no doubt that all the shoes, including Oi's, would fit perfectly, and clapped them briskly together 3 times. It meant nothing to Roland, but both Eddie and Susanna reacted violently, looking around, looking especially at the sky, as if expecting a storm born of this bright autumn sunshine. They ended up looking at the glass palace again, and then at each other in that knowing, round-eyed way that made Roland feel like shaking them both until their teeth rattled. Yet he waited. Sometimes that was all a man could do. "After you killed Jonas, you looked into the ball," Eddie said, turning to him. "Yes. Traveled in the ball." "Yes, but I don't want to talk about that again now. It has nothing to do with these." "I think it does," Eddie said. "You flew inside a pink storm, inside a pink gale, you could say. Gale is a word you might use for a storm, isn't it? Especially if you were making up a riddle." "Sure," Jake said. He sounded dreamy, almost like a boy who talks in his sleep. "When does Dorothy fly over the wizard's rainbow? When she's a gale." "We ain't in Kansas anymore, sugar," Susanna said, and voiced a strange, humorless bark which Roland supposed was a species of laughter. "May look a little like it, but Kansas was never, this thin." "I don't understand you," Roland said, but he felt cold and his heart was beating too fast. There were thinnies everywhere now. Hadn't he told them that? Worlds melting into one another as the forces of the tower weakened, as the day when the roads would be plowed under drew nearer. "You saw things as you flew," Eddie said, "but before you got to the dark land, the one you call Thunderclap, you saw things. The piano player, Sheb, who turned up again later in your life, didn't he?" "Yes, in Tull." "And the dweller with the red hair." "Him too. He had a bird named Zoltan, but when we met, he and I, we said the normal. Life for you, life for your crop, that sort of thing. I thought I'd heard the same when he flew by me in the pink storm, but he really said something else." He glanced at Susanna. "I saw your wheelchair, too, the old one. And you saw the witch." "Yes, In a creaky chortle that reminded Roland unnervingly of Rhea, Jake Chambers cried, "I'll get you, my pretty, and your little dog, too." Roland stared at him, trying not to gape. "Only in the movie, the witch wasn't riding a broom," Jake said. "She was on her bike, the one with the basket on the back." "Yeah, no reap charms either," Eddie said. "Would have been a nice touch, though. I'll tell you, Jake, when I was a kid, I used to have nightmares about the way she laughed." "It was the monkeys that gave me the creeps," Susanna said. "The flying monkeys. I'd get thinking about them and then have to crawl into bed with my mom and dad. They'd still be arguing about whose bright idea it was to take me to the show in the first place when I fell asleep between them." "I wasn't worried about clapping the heels together," Jake said. "Not a bit." It was Susanna and Eddie he was speaking to for the first time. It was as if Roland wasn't even there. It wasn't wearing them, after all. True, Susanna said, sounding severe, but you know what my daddy always used to say. No, but I have a feeling we're going to find out, Eddie said. She gave Eddie a brief, severe look, then turned her attention back to Jake. Never whistle for the wind unless you want it to blow, she said, and it's good advice, no matter what young Mr. Foolish here may think. Spanked again, Eddie said, grinning. Thanked, Oy said, eyeing Eddie severely. Explain this to me, Roland said in his softest voice. I would hear. I would share your kef, and I would share it now. They told him a story almost every American child of the 20th century knew, about a Kansas farm girl named Dorothy Gale who had been carried away by a cyclone and deposited along with her dog in the land of Oz. There was no I-70 in Oz. Oh, I am so sorry. 1 second. So sorry about that. All right, where was I? They told him a story almost every American child of the 20th century knew, about a Kansas farm girl named Dorothy Gale who had been carried away by a cyclone and deposited, along with her dog, in the land of Oz. There was no I-70 in Oz, but there was a yellow brick road which served much the same purpose. And there were witches, both good and bad. There was a quartet comprised of Dorothy, Toto, and the 3 friends she met along the way, the Cowardly Lion, the Tin Woodman, and the Scarecrow. They each had bird and bear and hare and fish, a fondest wish, and it was with Dorothy's that Roland's new friends, and Roland himself for that matter, identified the most strongly. She wanted to find her way home again. The Munchkins told her that she had to follow the yellow brick road to Oz, Jake said, and so she went. She met the others along the way, sort of like you met us, Roland. Although you don't look much like Judy Garland, Eddie put in. And eventually they got there, to Oz, the Emerald Palace and the guy who lived in the Emerald Palace. He looked toward the glass palace ahead of them, greener and greener in the strengthening light, and then back to Roland. Yes, I understand. And was this fellow, Oz, a powerful dean, a baron, perhaps a king? Again, the 3 of them exchanged a glance from which Roland was excluded. That's complicated, Jake said. He was sort of a humbug. A bum-hug? What's that? Humbug, Jake said, laughing. A faker, all talk, no action. But mayhap the important thing is that the wizard actually came from... Wizard? Roland asked sharply. He grasped Jake's shoulder with his diminished right hand. Why do you call him so? Because that was his title, Shug, Susanna said, the Wizard of Oz. She lifted Roland's hand gently but firmly from Jake's shoulder. Let him tell it now. He don't need you to squeeze it all out of him. Did I hurt you, Jake? I cry your pardon. Nah, I'm fine, Jake said. Don't worry about it. Anyway, Dorothy and her friends had a lot of adventures before finding out the wizard was, a bum-hug. Jake giggled at this with his hands clapped to his forehead and pushing back his hair like a child of 5. He couldn't give the lion courage, the Scarecrow a brain, or the Tin Woodman a heart. Worst of all, he couldn't send Dorothy back to Kansas. The wizard had a balloon, but he went without her. I don't think he meant to, but he did. It seems to me, from your telling of the tale, Roland said, speaking very slowly, that Dorothy's friends had the things they wanted all along. That's the moral of the story, Eddie said. Maybe that's what makes it a great story, but Dorothy was stuck in Oz, you see. Then Glinda showed up, and Glinda the Good, and as a present for smushing one of the bad witches under her house and melting another one, Glinda told Dorothy how to use the ruby slippers, the ones Glinda gave her. Eddie raised the red Cuban-heeled street boppers which had been left for him on the dotted white line of I-70. Glinda told Dorothy to click the heels of the ruby slippers together 3 times. That would take her back to Kansas, she said, and it did. And that was the end of the tale. Well, Jake said, it was so popular that the guy who wrote it went ahead and wrote about 1,000 more Oz stories. Yeah, Eddie said, everything but Glinda's Guide to Firm Thighs. And there was this crazy remake called The Wiz starring black people. Really? Susanna asked. She looked bemused. What a peculiar concept. But the only one that really matters is the first one, I think, Jake finished. Roland hunkered and put his hands into the boots which had been left for him. He lifted them, looked at them, put them down again. And we're supposed to put them on, do you think, here and now? His 3 friends from New York looked at each other doubtfully. At last, Susanna spoke for them, fed him the kef, which he could feel but not quite share on his own. Best not to right now, maybe. Too many badass spirits here. Takuro spirits, Eddie murmured, mostly to himself. Then, look, let's just take him along. If we're supposed to put him on, I think we'll know when the time comes. In the meantime, I think we ought to beware of bum hugs bearing gifts. It cracked Jake up, as Eddie had known it would. Sometimes a word or an image got into your funny bone like a virus, and it just lived there a while. Tomorrow, the word bum hug might mean nothing to the kid. For the rest of today, however, he was going to laugh every time he heard it. Eddie intended to use it a lot, especially when old Jake wasn't expecting it. They picked up the red shoes, which had been left for them in the eastbound lanes, and Jake took Oi's, and moved on again toward the shimmering glass castle. Oz, Roland thought. He searched his memory, but he didn't think it was a name he had ever heard before, or a word of the high speech that had come in disguise as Char had come disguised as Charlie. Yet it had a sound that belonged in this business, a sound more of his world than of Jake's, Susanna's and Eddie's, from whence the tale had come. Jake kept expecting the Green Palace to begin looking normal as they drew closer to it, the way the attractions in Disney World began to look normal as you drew close to them. Not ordinary necessarily, but normal things, which were as much a part of the world as the corner bus stop or mailbox or park bench. Stuff you could touch, stuff you could write "fuck Piper" on, if you took a notion. But that didn't happen. Wasn't going to happen, and as they neared the Green Palace, Jake realized something else. It was the most beautiful, radiant thing he'd ever seen in his life. Not trusting it, and he did not, didn't change the fact. It was like a drawing in a fairy tale book, one so good it had become real somehow. And, like the thinny, it hummed, except that this sound was far fainter and not unpleasant. Pale green walls rose to battlements that jutted and towers that soared, seeming almost to touch the clouds floating over the Kansas plains. These towers were topped with needles of a darker emerald green. It was from these that the red pennants flickered. Upon each pennant, the symbol of the open eye. It had been traced in yellow. It's the mark of the Crimson King, Jake thought. It's really his sigil, not John Farson's. He didn't know how he knew this. How could he, when Alabama's crimson tide was the only crimson anything he knew? But he did. So beautiful, Susanna murmured, and when Jake glanced at her, he thought she was almost crying. But not nice, somehow not right. But maybe not downright bad, the way the thinny is, but not nice, Eddie said. Yeah, that works. Not a red light, maybe, but a bright yellow one just the same. He rubbed the side of his face, a gesture he had picked up from Roland without even realizing it, and looked puzzled. It feels almost not serious. A practical joke. I doubt it's a joke, Roland said. Do you think it's a copy of the place where Dorothy and her quartet met the false wizard? Again, the 3 erstwhile New Yorkers seemed to exchange a single glance of consolation. When it was over, Eddie spoke for all of them. Yeah, probably. It's not the same as the one in the movie, but if this thing came out of our minds, it wouldn't be. Because we see the one from L. Frank Baum's book, too, both from the illustrations in the book and the ones from our imagination, Jake said. But that's it, Susanna said. I'd say we're definitely off to see the wizard. You bet, Eddie said. Because of the wonderful things he does, Jake and Susanna finished in unison, then laughed, delighted with each other, while Roland frowned at them, feeling puzzled and looking left out. But I have to tell you guys, Eddie said, that it's only going to take about one more wonderful thing to send me around to the dark side of the Psycho Moon, most likely for good. As they drew closer, they could see Interstate 70 stretching away into the pale green depths of the castle's slightly rounded outer wall. It floated there like an optical illusion. Closer yet, and they could hear the pennants snapping in the breeze and see their own ripply reflections, like drowned folks who somehow walk at the bottoms of watery tropical graves. There was an inner redoubt of dark blue glass. It was a color Jake associated with the bottle's fountain pen ink came in, and a rust hue wall walk between the redoubt and the outer wall. That color made Susanna think of the bottles Hires root beer had come in when she was a little girl. The way it was blocked by a barred gate that was both huge and ethereal. It looked like a wrought iron, which had been turned into glass. Each cunningly made stake was a different color, and these colors seemed to come from the inside, as if the bars were filled with some bright gas or liquid. The travelers stopped before it. There was no sign of the turnpike beyond it. Instead of roadway, there was a courtyard of silver glass, a huge flat mirror, in fact. Clouds floated serenely through its depths. So did the image of the occasional swooping bird. Sun reflected off this glass courtyard and ran across the green castle walls in ripples. On the far side, the wall of this palace's inner ward rose in a glimmery green cliff broken by narrow loophole windows of jet-black glass. There was also an arched entry in this wall that made Jake think of St. Patrick's Cathedral. To the left of the main doorway was a sentry box made of cream-colored glass, shot through with hazy orange threads. Its door, painted with red stripes, stood open. The phone booth-sized room inside was empty, although there was something on the floor which looked to Jake like a newspaper. Above the entry, flanking its darkness, were two crouching, leering gargoyles of darkest violet glass. Their pointed tongues poked out like bruises. The pennants atop the towers flapped like schoolyard flags. Crows cawed over empty cornfields, now a week past the reap. Distant, the thinny whined and warbled. "Look at the bars of this gate," Susanna said. She sounded breathless and awestruck. "Look very closely." Jake bent toward the yellow bar until his nose nearly touched it, and a faint yellow stripe ran down the middle of his face. At first he saw nothing, and then he gasped. What he had taken for motes of some kind were creatures, living creatures, imprisoned inside the bar, swimming in tiny schools. They looked like fish in an aquarium, but they also, their heads, Jake told himself, I think it's mostly their heads, looked oddly, disquietingly human. As if, Jake thought, he were looking into a vertical golden sea, all the ocean in a glass rod, and living myths no bigger than grains of dust swimming within it. A tiny woman with a fish's tail and long blonde hair streaming out behind her swam to her side of the glass, seemed to peer out at the giant boy. Her eyes were round, startled, and beautiful, and then flipped away again. Jake felt suddenly dizzy and weak. He closed his eyes until the feeling of vertigo went away, and then opened them again and looked around at the others. "Cripes, are they all the same?" "All different, I think," said Eddie, who had already peered in 2 or 3. He bent close to the purple rod, and his cheeks lit up as if the glow of an old-fashioned fluoroscope. "These guys here look like birds. Little tiny birds." Jake looked and saw that Eddie was right. Inside the gate's purple upright were flocks of birds no bigger than summer minges. They swooped giddily about in their eternal twilight, weaving over and under one another, their wings leaving tiny silver trails of bubbles. "Are they really there?" Jake asked breathlessly. "Are they, Roland? Or are we only imagining them?" "I don't know. But I know what this gate has been made to look like. "So do I," Eddie said. He surveyed the shining posts, each with its own column of imprisoned light and life. Each of the gate's wings consisted of... I'm so sorry. 1 second again. Alright, that was about the Colorado thing. Sorry about that, guys. Usually I would ignore the calls, but I can't today. Well, unless it's Super Munchkin, of course. Alright, where were we? He surveyed the shining posts, each with its own column of imprisoned light and life. Each of the gate's wings consisted of 6 colored bars, the one in the center, broad and flat instead of round, and made to split in two when the gate was opened, was the 13th. This one was dead black, and in this one, nothing moved. Oh, maybe not that you can see, but there are things moving around in there all right, Jake thought. There's life in there. Terrible life. Maybe there are roses, too. Drowned ones. It was a wizard's gate, Eddie said. Each bar has been made to look like one of the balls in the Merlin's rainbow. Look here, the pink one. Jake leaned toward it, hands propped on his thighs. He knew what he would see inside before he saw them. Horses, of courses, tiny herds of them, galloping through the strange pink stuff that was neither light nor liquid. Horses running in search of the drop they would never find, mayhap. Eddie stretched his hands out to grasp the sides of the central post. The black one. Don't, Susanna called sharply. Eddie ignored her, but Jake saw his chest stop for a moment and his lips tighten as he wrapped his hands around the black bar and waited for something. Some force, perhaps, sent special delivery all the way from the Dark Tower itself to change him, or even to strike him dead. When nothing happened, he breathed deep again and risked a smile. No electricity, but... He pulled. The gate held fast. No give, either. I see where it splits down the middle, but I get nothing. Want to take a shot, Roland? Roland reached for the gate, but Jake put a hand on his arm and stopped him before the gunslinger could do more than give it a preliminary shake. Don't bother. That's not the way. Then what is? Instead of answering, Jake sat down in front of the gate near the place where the strange version of I-70 ended and began putting on the shoes which had been left for them. Eddie watched a moment, then sat down beside him. I guess we ought to try it, he said to Jake, even though it'll probably turn out to be just another bum hug. Jake laughed, shook his head, and began to tighten the laces on the blood-red Oxfords. He and Eddie both knew it was no bum hug. Not this time. Okay, Jake said when they had all put their red shoes on. He thought they looked extraordinarily stupid, especially Eddie's pair. I'll count to 3, and we'll click our heels together, like this. He clicked the Oxfords together once, sharply, and the gate shivered like a loosely fastened shutter blown by a strong wind. Susanna cried out. There followed a low, sweet chiming sound from the green palace, as if the walls themselves had vibrated. I guess this'll do the trick, all right, Eddie said. I warn you, though, I'm not singing somewhere over the rainbow. That's not in my contract. The rainbow is here, the gunslinger said softly, stretching his diminished hand out to the gate. It wiped the smile off Eddie's face. Yeah, I know. I'm a little scared, Roland. So am I, the gunslinger said, and indeed, Jake thought he looked pale and ill. Go on, Sugar, Susanna said. Count before we all lose our nerve. 1, 2, 3. They clicked their heels together solemnly and in unison, tuck, tuck, tuck. The gate shivered more violently this time. The colors in the uprights brightened perceptibly. The chime that followed was higher, sweeter. The sound of fine crystal tapped with the haft of a knife. It echoed in dreamy harmonics that made Jake shiver half with pleasure and half with pain. But the gate didn't open. What? Eddie began. I know, Jake said. We forgot Oi. Oh, Christ, Eddie said. I left the world I knew to watch a kid try to put booties on a fucked-up weasel. Shoot me, Roland, before I breed. Roland ignored him, watching Jake closely as the boy sat down under the turnpike and called Oi to me. The bumbler came willingly enough, and although he had surely been a wild creature before they had met him on the path of the beam, he allowed Jake to slip the red leather booties onto his paws without making trouble. In fact, once he got the idea, he stepped into the last two. When all four of the little red shoes were in place, they looked, in fact, the most like Dorothy's ruby slippers. Oi sniffed at one of them, and then looked attentively back at Jake. Jake clicked his heels together 3 times, looking at the bumbler as he did so, ignoring the rattle of the gate and the soft chime from the walls of the Green Palace. You, Oi! Oi! He rolled over his back like a dog playing dead, then simply looked at his own feet with a kind of disgusted bewilderment. Looking at him, Jake had a sharp memory, trying to pat his stomach and rub his head at the same time, and his father making fun of him when he couldn't do it right away. Roland, help me. He knows what he's supposed to do, but he doesn't know how to do it. Jake glanced up at Eddie. Don't make any smart remarks, okay? No, Eddie said. No smart remarks, Jake. Do you think just Oi has to do it this time? Or is it still a group effort? Just him, I think. But it wouldn't hurt us to kind of click along with Mitch, Susanna said. Mitch who? Eddie asked, looking blank. Never mind. Go on, Jake Roland. Give us a count again. Eddie grasped Oi's forepaws. Roland gently grasped the bumbler's rear paws. Oi looked nervous at this, as if he perhaps expected to be swung briskly into the air and given the old heave-ho, but he didn't struggle. 1, 2, 3. Jake and Roland gently patted Oi's forepaws and rear paws together in unison. At the same time, they clicked the heels of their own footwear. Eddie and Susanna did the same. This time, the harmonic was a deep, sweet bong like a glass church bell. The black glass bar running down the center of the gate did not split open, but shattered, spraying crumbs of obsidian glass in all directions. Some rattled against Oi's hide. He sprang up in a hurry, yanking out of Jake and Roland's grip and trotting a little distance away. He sat on the broken white line between the travel lane and the passing lane of the highway, his ears laid back, looking at the gate and panting. Come on, Roland said. He went to the left wing of the gate and pushed it slowly open. He stood at the edge of the mirror courtyard, a tall, lanky man in cowpoke jeans, an ancient shirt of no particular color, and improbable red cowboy boots. Let's go in and see what the Wizard of Oz has to say for himself. If he's still here, Eddie said. Oh, I think he's here, Roland murmured. Yes, I think he's here. He ambled toward the main door with the empty sentry box inside it. The others followed, welded to their own downward reflections by the red shoes like sets of Siamese twins. Oi came last, skipping nimbly along in his ruby slippers, pausing once to sniff down at his own reflected snout. Oi! He cried to the bumbler floating below him, and then hurried after Jake. Alright, I guess we will go ahead and stop there. And I think that next time we will finish this book, and then we will be on to the next book. Thank you for stopping by. I hope you pretty shiny peoples are doing fantastically. Don't forget to smile bunches, laugh lots, and have great fun in later days.